Looking back on your journey building Zehitomo, was there any key things or key mistakes that you made that slowed down your growth?
I think the one thing in reflection every year, it sounds obvious, but it's the power of focus. I would always talk when I was hiring employees or scaling or what are we focusing on, I would always talk in order of magnitude growth. So what is our bottleneck for growth and what do we need to do to grow basically 10x, right? And yes, we want to solve A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's all these problems. There's people calling up with complaints about this. There's new opportunities about this. But if we are to grow 10x, what is our bottleneck? And how do we address that? And focusing all on your biggest bottleneck and growing. Once you grow 10x, you have a completely different set of problems and opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's super powerful about figuring out what is the biggest bottleneck. How do you actually figure out what is the biggest bottleneck? Because I think a lot of people, they see a bunch of problems, they can all be solved.
Yeah.
But some obviously aren't the biggest problem. How do you realize or how do you figure out like this is the one that's going to take us to 10x growth?
Yeah. I think as an engineer, I usually reverse solve, right? So I think what does success look like for Zehitomo, right? Or for your company, whatever the startup is, right? Imagine what that looks like. How many users doing what with what business models, right? What is your ideal situation once you've solved everything you want to solve in the world look like? And then maybe that's a $10 billion or $100 billion business. Then reverse solve in order of magnitudes, right? So what does it look like when it's 1 billion, when it's 100 million, 10 million, 1 million, right? And so say you're going from 100K to 1 million, right? You should understand like which problems do you solve in which order? It's really a sequencing thing, right? So same thing when founders say, hey, when should I go global? It's like, when that's the fastest path to 10x growth, right? If your distribution is going to allow you to scale 10x faster, you can scale 10x in the next 6 months just going to the neighboring prefecture versus trying to enter a completely different market, then it's very much like you're growing faster. That will then allow you to have more capital and more power to be able to eventually do these bigger challenges. So a lot of it is the sequencing. And so, hey, we want to do all these things. Yes, we will do all these things in the fullness of time. But right now, to be able to get there, first we have to solve X. And sometimes at the very beginning, that was, okay, how do we get the number of requests up, right? How do we, in solving SEO, okay, how do we get the number of professionals, right? How do we 10x their retention rate, right? How do we then 10x our unit economics so we can scale our sales organization? How do we then actually go out and, grow now that we can actually look at revenue, right? And 10x revenue, right? So I think it gets a little easier once you have stable unit economics and revenue and an organization. Then it's usually, you can just kind of think about revenue growth and you can pretty usually tell like growing 2 to 3x, you can just kind of improve processes and add more resources and take some time. But to grow 10x, you'll often run into different constraints. And so forcing yourself to think, what does that 10x look like? Where are you going to face bottlenecks? It usually becomes pretty clear.
Do you think sometimes founders, they know what the 10x thing is, but they just don't do it because it's actually the hardest thing to do potentially? And that's why they feel like if I focus on the little things, it makes me feel good, I'm getting things done.
I think often it's not, even if it may make sense, most people aren't thinking about it consciously. It's just not like a mental exercise that they've done in terms of laying out the numbers and saying, in order to grow 10x, this is the one number that we must move the most. And in order to do that, these are our bottlenecks for it.
And this is such an important concept, and honestly, it's a mistake I've made myself. So to make this easier for you to actually apply, I've turned all of this into a free guide that you can use for your own business. It'll walk you through how to identify your biggest bottleneck, what you should actually be focusing on, and how to figure out your next move. It's completely free and I've linked it in the description below.